Have you ever felt like you were born to do something, but the world kept telling you that you didn't belong? That every step you took was a fight against an invisible current? This is the story of Avery Lang, a young soldier with a burning passion to fly the legendary Apache helicopter, the same machine her father once flew. With her hair pulled tight, a fierce eagle tattoo on her left arm, and eyes that held the weight of a legacy, she faced a world that refused to see her as anything more than the doll who wants to play Rambo. But some people are not defined by what others say they are. They are defined by what they do when nobody is watching. This is the story of how one woman's quiet determination and a promise carved in ink helped her claim the sky she was born to conquer. The shout tore through the training field like a commandment. Nobody lets her touch that machine. Every head turned. Soldiers froze mid-step, eyes snapping toward the young woman standing rigidly on the tarmac. Her brown hair was pulled tight under her cap, her uniform streaked with grease and sweat, and on her bare left forearm, a fierce eagle ripped through storm clouds in black ink as if trying to escape her skin. Avery Lang didn't flinch. She stared at the Apache helicopter in front of her like it was alive, like some part of her had been waiting its whole life to sit in that cockpit. 10 long minutes passed under the brutal sun before the rhythmic crunch of boots broke the silence. A colonel approached, his shadow long across the concrete. He stopped in front of her, eyes sliding down to the tattoo that seemed to pulse against her skin. Without a word, he pulled a ring of keys from his pocket and pressed the cold metal into her trembling hand. Somewhere behind her, a soldier whispered, "Who is she?" Avery Lang, 29 years old, born into a family where the military wasn't a career, it was the air they breathed. Generations of service ran through her blood. Utah deserts had been her playground, and the voice of her father, Staff Sergeant Michael Lang, had been the soundtrack of her childhood until the day he didn't come home from Iraq. She was 10. After that, her world was filled with the crackle of old radios, stiff uniforms hanging in closets, and photographs that stared back at her with the quiet weight of duty and loss. Following his footsteps wasn't enough. She didn't want to walk where he walked. She wanted to fly where he once flew. Her dream was sharp and unshakable. She would become an Apache pilot. She would master the machine that ruled the skies like a predator. But dreams like that come wrapped in broken glass. From her first day at Flight Academy, she was the only woman in the class. To the others, she wasn't a soldier. She was a joke with a flight suit. Flying Barbie, Rambo's doll. Every word was a test she refused to fail. She said nothing, filed every insult away, and worked twice as hard as the rest of them. When a male classmate stuffed clay into the control stick of her simulator, she didn't run to the instructors. She pried it out, cleaned the stick, and started the simulation over. Quiet, steady, unshaken. Weeks later, in the emergency failure simulation, the one designed to break cadets, every light on the panel went dark. Systems failed one by one, alarms screamed, and the room spun with tension. Avery's hands stayed steady. She was the only one to land the simulated Apache safely. The instructor barely looked up. "Just lucky," he muttered. The words cut colder than steel, but Avery's face stayed like stone. Inside, she heard her father's voice, low and steady as always. "Real strength isn't what you say, sweetheart. It's what you do when nobody's watching." That night, under a sky thick with stars that seemed to mock her, she made a decision. She found a small tattoo parlor just outside base, the kind that smelled of ink and metal. She asked for an eagle tearing through storm clouds, her father's unit emblem. The sting of the needle was nothing compared to the ache of being invisible. Graduation came with no fanfare. A gray morning, only her mother in the audience. No claps from her classmates, no dinner invites, no speeches. Avery walked out of the hall alone, slipped on her aviators, tucked her flight cap under her arm, and smiled. Not with joy, but with survival. The battle wasn't over, but she'd won the first round. That eagle on her arm was no longer just ink. It was a vow, a reminder. Eagles don't ask permission to soar. They claim the sky. Her mother hugged her tight in the parking lot, voice cracking. "Your father would be so proud, honey." Avery nodded, but her eyes were already on the horizon. She knew the real war hadn't begun. Flight school had been the warm-up. Now came the crucible, earning her seat in the cockpit of the most feared helicopter in the military. The Apache wasn't just a machine, it was a $30 million beast of war, a weapon that demanded perfection and punished hesitation. Pilots spent years trying to earn the right to even touch it. Avery swore she'd earn it, no matter how many walls she had to break through. That night, she folded her dress uniform with crisp precision, packed her single duffel, and traced her fingers over the eagle one more time. Tomorrow she would report to Fort Hunter Lyot, the legendary Apache training ground where pilots were made, or broken. What she didn't know was that her hardest battles wouldn't be against enemy fire or mechanical failures. They would be against the men who refused to see her as anything but a woman pretending to be a soldier. But eagles don't break. And Avery Lang was about to prove that some fights are worth everything. Under the merciless desert sun, Avery Lang felt as if the heat itself were testing her will to stay. The air shimmered above the sand, and the tarmac radiated like it was made of molten steel. This was the elite Apache training facility, where only the world's best came to learn how to command the deadliest helicopter ever built. Yet, from the moment she arrived, it was clear that no one here intended to let her touch a flight stick. They didn't give her a training schedule or a cockpit briefing, no simulator hours, no flight assignments. Instead, they handed her a wrench and waved her toward the maintenance bay as if she were just another grease-stained mechanic. Lieutenant Jackson, the training supervisor, had made his stance crystal clear that first morning. His voice carried across the hangar, sharp and cutting, making sure everyone could hear. "You might be a theory genius on paper, Lang," he said, his smirk almost daring her to react. "But people like you don't belong in the cockpit. Apache helicopters aren't built for fragile little princesses. Don't waste my time, or the time of real soldiers." The words sliced through her, but Avery's face stayed cold and unreadable. She gave a single nod, turned on her heel, and walked toward the maintenance hangar. Her boots echoed against the concrete floor, each step sounding as hollow as the welcome she'd received. The first week blurred into the second. She spent her days scrubbing grime off aircraft panels, double-checking electrical systems, and logging maintenance reports. Work that felt like punishment disguised as training. All the while, she watched the other trainees, every one of them male, lift off into the sky in the very machine she'd dreamed of flying since childhood. During lunch, she always sat by herself. The men clustered in groups, making jokes just loud enough for her to catch every word. "Apaches aren't designed for people who worry about breaking a nail," one said. "Yeah," another chimed in. "What if she needs to touch up her lipstick mid-flight?" Their laughter was sharp as broken glass. Avery stared at her dry, tasteless sandwich and chewed slowly, swallowing every insult with every bite. At night, the hangar became her secret classroom. When the base went quiet, she'd slip into an empty Apache cockpit, the faint smell of jet fuel and oil wrapping around her like armor. Her fingers would glide over every switch and dial, memorizing the position of each control until she could picture it all in her sleep. She studied each gauge like a child learning the alphabet, determined that when her chance finally came, she'd be ready. In the stillness, she would hear her father's voice, calm and unwavering, as if he were sitting right behind her. "Real strength shows up when everything's working against you, sweetheart." Then one scorching afternoon, chaos erupted. Alarms blared through the training yard, an unscheduled emergency drill. 4 pilots were needed for a high-stakes medevac simulation, and timing was critical. The scenario, lives were on the line, and every second counted. Avery's hands shot into the air before anyone else's. Jackson's laugh was colder than the desert night. "You, not qualified." Another pilot snickered. "Go shine some windshields, Lang. Leave the flying to us." The team scrambled to their assigned helicopters. But as the blades began to spin, disaster struck. The lead Apache refused to start. Engine dead, electrical system flatlined. The entire simulation was moments from collapse. Avery was standing closest to the grounded bird. Her pulse spiked. She didn't ask for permission. She dropped to her knees and slid under the cockpit panel, hands moving instinctively, faster than thought. Wires, circuits, connectors. Her mind traced the pathways she had rehearsed alone in the dark, night after night. 15 seconds in, she found it. A loose fuel injector connection. tucked deep behind the main power coupling. "Reset the emergency startup sequence," she shouted, her voice slicing through the commotion. Jackson spun toward her, stunned. "What the hell did you just do?" "I fixed what everyone else missed," she said, standing and brushing dust from her uniform. "The fuel injector was disconnected. Basic maintenance check. Something I picked up during all those hours you had me polishing windows." The engine coughed, then roared to life, echoing across the base. The other pilots froze, watching the woman they'd dismissed do, in seconds, what none of them could manage. For one fleeting heartbeat, Avery thought she saw awe in their eyes. But Jackson's face hardened. No gratitude, no acknowledgement, only resentment. "Lucky guess," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't let it go to your head." That night, Avery lay on her bunk in the dim barracks, staring at the eagle tattoo stretched across her shoulder under the fluorescent light. Each tiny sting of the tattoo needle came back to her now, and it felt softer than the daily humiliation she endured here. She traced the inked wings with a fingertip, remembering the day she'd chosen the design, an eagle breaking through storm clouds. The tattoo artist had asked her why. "Because eagles don't ask permission to fly," she told him. "They just spread their wings and take the sky." The barracks were quiet except for the deep, uneven snores of soldiers who had never truly welcomed her. Avery Lang lay awake, staring at the faint outline of the eagle tattoo on her arm under the dim light. It wasn't just ink. It was a promise, one she whispered silently to herself in the darkness. She would do more than just prove she could fly. She would show the world she had been born to fly. When dawn broke over the desert base, the air buzzed with a tension Avery hadn't felt before. News spread fast. A special inspection team was arriving, led by Colonel Richard Hayes himself. He was a legend in the aviation world, an Apache pilot who had survived 3 combat deployments. Soldiers lowered their voices when they spoke his name, as if his presence demanded reverence. Avery didn't know the full story yet, but fate had already tied her life to the colonel's. Colonel Hayes had once flown side by side with her father, Staff Sergeant Michael Lang, during the Iraq War. He'd been there the day her father died, when Mike Lang risked everything to pull his unit out of an ambush. Hayes had not only witnessed his courage, but he had also written the recommendation for the Medal of Honor her father would receive 2 years after his death, long after the funeral, long after the folded flag was handed to Avery's trembling hands. That morning, Avery was exactly where she always was, crouched beside the base's Apache helicopters, wiping oil from the landing gear of 47 Delta. Her hands were black with grease, sweat soaked through her uniform, and the desert sun pressed against her like a weight. The work was exhausting and thankless, but she treated every bolt and blade like sacred metal. To her, these machines were more than steel. They were the wings she'd been denied but would claim someday. She didn't know that in 10 minutes, everything would shift. She didn't know that the eagle inked on her arm, the same symbol her father had carried into battle, was about to open a door that had stayed locked since the day she arrived at Fort Hunter Lyot. Colonel Hayes's convoy rolled through the gates, dust rising behind the vehicles. When he stepped out, he squinted against the desert glare, adjusting his sunglasses with a casual motion honed by years in the field. His boots crunched across the sun-baked asphalt as his sharp eyes scanned the training grounds, absorbing the orchestrated chaos of soldiers, mechanics, and aircraft. Then his gaze caught on a single figure. A young soldier knelt beside Apache 47 Delta, hair pulled back tight, uniform clinging with sweat and streaked with oil. She touched the helicopter with a quiet reverence, as if she were praying to it, lost in the ritual of maintenance. Hayes slowed, something in her posture tugging at a memory buried under 15 years of dust and war. He knew that stance. He knew that careful respect. He moved closer, his inspection team trailing behind him, their footsteps sharp in the dry heat. The soldier shifted slightly, rolling up a sleeve, and Hayes saw it, a tattoo of an eagle bursting through storm clouds. His breath caught. It wasn't just any eagle. It was the emblem of the 82nd Aviation Regiment, the very patch he had worn in Iraq, the very patch that had once been stitched to the sleeve of Staff Sergeant Michael Lang. Hayes stopped so abruptly that his aide nearly bumped into him. "Sir, is everything all right?" the aide asked, puzzled. Hayes didn't answer. His mind had already left the sunburned tarmac and traveled back 15 years to a forward operating base in Kandahar. He saw Mike Lang's grin under the rotor wash of a departing helicopter, heard the distant pop of gunfire, and remembered the day Lang saved his life and the lives of every man in their unit. He remembered standing at the funeral months later, looking at the widow and her 10-year-old daughter, and whispering a promise he had meant with all his heart. "I'll watch out for your family, Mike. Always." Life had pulled them apart after that day. Military families scattered like leaves in the wind, carried off by new postings and deployments. Hayes had lost track of them. Until now, because that tattoo wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. His heartbeat quickened as he strode across the blazing asphalt toward the young soldier, every step landing with the old precision of combat training. She didn't notice him until he called out, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Soldier!" Avery's head snapped up. She sprang to her feet and locked into a perfect salute. "Sir!" Colonel Hayes studied her face, letting the memories settle into place. The determined line of her jaw. The same fierce fire in her eyes he had seen once before, on a little girl standing beside a flag-draped coffin. The daughter of the bravest man he had ever known was standing right in front of him, and she had no idea that her life was about to change. The name hit him like a hammer. "Private First Class Avery Lang, sir." For a heartbeat, the world stopped turning. Colonel Richard Hayes's eyes locked on the tattoo etched along her forearm, then drifted back to her face. His chest tightened. He knew her. This wasn't just another young soldier. This was Mike Lang's daughter, the same little girl he remembered, saluting her father's flag-draped coffin with tears carving silent paths down her cheeks 15 years ago. Your Staff Sergeant Michael Lang's daughter?" Hayes's voice was rougher than he expected. "Yes, sir," Avery said, steady despite the storm of emotion threatening to crush her from the inside. The weight of 15 years crashed down on Hayes like a tidal wave. Guilt, heavy and merciless, swelled in his chest. He had promised himself he would watch over Mike's family after the funeral, that he would make sure they were safe, that his best friend's sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. But life, duty, and war had swept that promise away. And now here she was, grown, proud, and neglected under his own command. His jaw tightened. He turned toward Lieutenant Jackson, who had been hovering nearby, confusion and unease tightening his posture. "Lieutenant Jackson," Hayes said, his voice sharp. "Report." Jackson jogged over and snapped to attention. His words rushed, but clipped. "Sir, everything is running smoothly. Training objectives are being met. No issues to report." "No issues?" Hayes's voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried the weight of a battlefield command. The quiet anger in it hit Jackson harder than a shout. "This soldier has been here for weeks," Hayes continued, "and instead of flying, you have her cleaning aircraft?" Jackson hesitated, the confidence draining from his face. "Sir, she's not qualified for flight training. Women aren't really—" "Stop talking." The order cracked like a whip. Jackson flinched, as if struck. Hayes closed the distance between them, his presence towering, the aura of a man who had faced fire and earned his authority in blood. "Staff Sergeant Michael Lang died saving my unit in Iraq," he said, each word sharp and heavy with memory. "He was the finest pilot I ever flew with. And this," Hayes turned back to Avery, "is his daughter." Jackson's face went pale as new snow. Without another word, Hayes reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn set of aircraft keys. They gleamed in the sunlight, familiar, heavy with history. "Private Lang," he said softly, the tone of a father rather than a commanding officer. "These belong to Apache 47 Delta, the same helicopter you've been cleaning. That bird belonged to your father's unit. I think it's time it had a real pilot again." He pressed the keys into Avery's trembling hands. Silence fell over the entire maintenance bay. Wrenches stopped clinking. Conversations died. Even the desert winds seemed to pause, as if the base itself was holding its breath. Avery stared down at the keys, her vision blurring with the tears she had refused to shed for weeks. In that moment, she felt him, her father, standing at her shoulder, warm and steady. "Sir, her voice cracked. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Hayes said. His voice was gentle now, carrying the weight of pride and redemption. Just show me what Mike Lang's daughter can do. Avery climbed into the Apache's cockpit like she was stepping into a memory. Her movements were fluid, instinctive, as if she had been born for this seat. Her fingers found every switch and lever without hesitation. The pre-flight checks rolled off her hands and mind like muscle memories she hadn't realized she carried. Then the Apache roared to life. It wasn't just the growl of an engine, it was a sound of vindication, of buried dreams clawing their way to the surface, of a daughter answering the call of a legacy written in the sky. From the tarmac, Lieutenant Jackson stood frozen, his long-held assumptions shattering like glass. For 30 uninterrupted minutes, Avery flew. She handled the Apache with the kind of natural precision that left hardened veterans speechless. Every bank, every hover, every landing was flawless. She didn't just pilot the machine, she became part of it. When she brought the bird down and shut off the engines, the stillness that followed felt sacred. Without orders, the veteran pilot standing nearby snapped to attention, an unspoken salute to both father and daughter. Colonel Hayes walked towards her as she climbed down, her boots hitting the ground with quiet authority. A grizzled sergeant from the inspection team approached him, his voice rough with awe. "Colonel," the man said, shaking his head slowly, "that was some of the finest flying I've seen in 20 years. Hayes nodded but kept his eyes on Avery, pride and relief flickering in his expression. "Her father saved my life in Kandahar," he said softly, "and today she saved something just as important." The sergeant frowned. "What's that, sir?" Hayes's voice was firm but warm, the belief that courage runs in families. Dust swirled around the silent Apache as Avery glanced at the eagle tattoo on her arm. For the first time since she had inked it, the eagle wasn't fighting through storm clouds. It was soaring through open sky. The transformation at Fort Hunter Lyot wasn't immediate, but it was complete. Whispers spread like wildfire. The woman they had dismissed as just another girl trying to play soldier was the daughter of a war hero, and the pilot they refused to train had just taken flight. Avery Lang had delivered the kind of flight demonstration people would talk about for years, flawless, precise, and unforgettable. It was the sort of performance that silenced doubt without needing a single word. 3 days later, Lieutenant Jackson was gone. Officially, he'd been reassigned to a lonely outpost, a desk job buried in the middle of nowhere, a place where his narrow-mindedness could no longer sabotage anyone else's future. But before he left, something Avery had never expected happened. On the 4th morning of her official training as an Apache pilot, she returned to her bunk to find a folded, creased piece of paper resting on her blanket. It looked as if someone had written it, crumpled it in frustration, tossed it, then dug it back out of the trash. In rough handwriting, the note read, "Private Lang, I was wrong about everything. Your father would be proud of the soldier you've become. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we gave up on you." Jackson Avery stared at it for a long time. She read it once, then again. Her chest tightened in a way she hadn't felt since basic training, a strange mix of relief and old hurt. Carefully, she folded the note and tucked it into her footlocker, placing it right next to the photograph of her father in uniform. She understood something in that moment. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting the humiliation or the pain. It meant refusing to let that pain define who she would become. The shift in the air around her was subtle but undeniable. The very soldiers who had once mocked her during lunch breaks now approached her with a different kind of energy. No one said the word sorry. Pride ran deep in the military, and some words were simply too heavy to lift. But actions could speak louder than apologies. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had once joked about her breaking a nail in the cockpit, quietly asked if she would look over his emergency landing procedures. He admitted he had been struggling with a maneuver for weeks. Private Chen, the loudest laugher during her worst days, began sitting near her during briefings. When Avery answered the technical questions that left others stumped, he scribbled notes furiously. Even the mechanics who had once watched her scrub helicopter parts in silence began inviting her opinion on diagnostics. She had spent so many weeks in forced maintenance duty that she now knew the Apaches inside and out, details most pilots never learned. "You know these birds better than anyone," Chief Warrant Officer Martinez said one afternoon. shaking his head in astonishment after she spotted a hydraulic leak that 3 experienced mechanics had overlooked. "You've been inside every system." Word traveled fast. Colonel Hayes himself assigned Avery as the assistant instructor for new pilot orientation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman they had once refused to train was now training others. Her very first class brought the challenge she knew would come sooner or later. A young male pilot, fresh out of flight school, raised his hand with a hesitant frown. "Ma'am," he said, "some of the guys are saying you only got this position because of your father. Is that true?" The room went silent. 20 pairs of eyes watched her, waiting to see if she would falter. Avery didn't scold him. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she walked to the whiteboard and began writing out the specifications for an Apache's emergency auto rotation, a complex, life-saving maneuver for engine failure. "Your father's reputation might open a door for you," she said calmly, her back still to the class, "but it won't keep you alive at 3,000 feet when everything goes wrong. That's what training is for." When she turned to face them, her voice was steady, carrying the weight of someone who had lived through every ounce of what she was teaching. "My father died serving this country. I'm here to honor his service by being the best pilot I can be. If anyone here thinks that's unfair, you're welcome to transfer to a different program." Nobody moved. "Good," she said. "Now let's learn how to fly these machines the right way." On the wall behind her desk, Avery hung a new photograph. It wasn't of herself or any award. It was her father, Staff Sergeant Michael Lang, standing in his flight gear beside an Apache in Iraq. Beneath it, a small inscription read, "He taught his daughter that eagles don't ask permission to soar." Every morning, new trainees would see that picture and understand that their instructor wasn't just another pilot. She carried something heavier than textbooks and checklists. She carried the weight of someone who had truly earned her wings and fire. Avery Lang's story didn't end in headlines or on social media. It lived in quieter places, inside the conversations between soldiers who recognized the shape of real courage when they saw it. 3 years later, Fort Hunter Liggett was not the same place. Its culture hadn't shifted because of policy changes or diversity programs. It had changed because one woman refused to break when the entire world had tried to bend her. Young female recruits would come to Apache training, wide-eyed and buzzing with whispered stories. There was always talk about the pilot with the eagle tattoo, some legendary figure they weren't sure was real. For many, it was just another military campfire tale, until the day they saw her, Avery Lang. She strode across the sun-baked tarmac with the kind of quiet authority that made heads turn without her trying. Every step said she belonged here, in a world that had once told her she didn't. Confidence clung to her like the desert heat, not loud or boastful, but the kind you felt more than saw. A calm certainty built from years of proving herself. Captain Sarah Morrison, fresh from flight school and still shaking the dust off her first week of training, finally approached her. She hesitated at first, standing a little straighter when Avery's sharp eyes lifted from the maintenance checklist in her hands. "Ma'am, the other women and we just wanted to thank you," Sarah said, the words tumbling out in a mix of awe and relief. "For making this possible." Avery's gaze softened, but she shook her head. Her voice was low, steady. "I didn't make anything possible," she said, closing the clipboard with a snap. "I just refused to make it impossible." She pushed up her sleeve and tapped the eagle tattoo on her arm. Its lines faded now, worn down by the relentless desert sun and countless missions. "This isn't about me, Captain," Avery said, the corners of her mouth curving in the faintest hint of a smile. "It's about everyone who comes after." Colonel Richard Hayes, now grayer and slower than he liked to admit, often found himself watching Avery during training exercises. In her, he saw not just a pilot, but a force of nature. She wasn't Staff Sergeant Lang's daughter anymore. She was one of the finest Apache pilots in the entire military. Every flight hour, every perfect maneuver was hers and hers alone. One afternoon, leaning against the railing as the sun flared across the airfield, Hayes murmured to his aide, "She's better than her old man ever was. Mike would be proud." Avery never chased command positions, headlines, or applause. Her world was simpler. Fly the missions, train the next generation, keep her bird in perfect shape. Her dedication had been the same from the very first day she stepped onto this base, a quiet fire that never wavered. And yet, whenever young soldiers, men and women alike, hit that wall of doubt that every soldier meets, they would find themselves looking for her, not for sympathy, not for special treatment. They sought her presence for proof. Proof that some battles were worth the bruises, the long nights, and the stubborn refusal to quit. That eagle tattoo had become more than ink on skin. It was a banner for anyone who had ever been told you can't. A silent vow that honor isn't inherited. It's built piece by piece in the lonely moments when no one's watching. On the days when a new class of pilots graduated, or when another soldier who had once been overlooked finally proved they belonged, Avery would find a quiet corner. She'd trace the outline of that fading eagle with her fingertip, and in the hum of the airfield, she would hear her father's voice like it had never left her. Real strength shows up when everything's working against you, sweetheart. And in the end, the strongest voices are the quietest ones, the ones that speak through action, not words.